Okay, well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today to learn about planning and managing open space for HOA and condo associations. I'm Jem Bingle, and I'm land use field staff for the Piedmont Environmental Council in Loudoun. We'll start by introducing the partners and folks who put this event together. If you don't know PEC, our service area is the 9 Piedmont counties from Loudoun and Clark in the north to Albemarle in the south. We have staff in each county and work with residents to improve the livability of their communities and quality of life through land planning policy and zoning and land conservation and preservation. We're happy to join Plant Nova natives and our other co-hosts in presenting today's program. For PEC, this symposium is the latest in our Greening Your HOA program that we started in 2012. Our goal has been to give Loudoun HOA residents and boards information to help broaden their understanding of their own backyards relative to the natural environment around them. We give information on how to have healthier soil, healthier streams and drinking water, and provide more habitat for the critters who live alongside us. We've had workshops for homeowners and 2 previous forums focused on HOA boards and property managers. For Loudoun HOAs, PEC has also been working with a new coalition, the Loudoun Coalition of Homeowner and Condominium Associations, that offers opportunities to interact with each other and share information between boards and with the county. I'm glad to share information about that if you're interested. Now our other organizers will introduce themselves, starting with Margaret Fisher, who I consider the heart and soul of Plant Nova Natives.
Thank you, Jem. Yes, I'm one of the organizers of the Plant Nova Natives campaign, which is a group effort by over 140 organizations and hundreds of individuals, all promoting native plants as the first step towards creating usable habitat on our properties. Our goal is to actually change the landscaping culture of Northern Virginia. And since there are 2 million some people in Northern Virginia, we need everybody's help in doing that, from you as individuals to your communities. So please help spread the word. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Renee Grebe, and I'm the Northern Virginia Conservation Advocate for the Audubon Naturalist Society. We're an independent Audubon group, and we're the DC region's oldest independent environmental organization. And through my work at ANS, I aim to inspire residents of Virginia to appreciate, understand, and protect their natural environment through outdoor experiences, education, and advocacy. And I also live in an HOA in Fairfax County, and I've led several environmental projects there, such as the installation of a rain garden and some bayscaping as well.
I'm Michael Myers. I'm the Executive Director of the Loudoun Wildlife Conservancy, and we inspire, motivate, and engage people to preserve, protect, and restore wildlife habitat here in Loudoun County. And we do that through our advocacy, education, habitat conservation, and citizen science programs. And we are the Loudoun host for the Audubon at Home program here in Loudoun County. That's all I have.
And Matt. Is he on?
Matt is on mute.
Well, you're on mute, Matt.
There we go. Thank you. Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself there for a bit. Hi, everyone. My name is Matt Gerhardt. I'm the Conservation Director at the Northern Virginia Conservation Trust, and we're a nonprofit land conservation group that works across Northern Virginia as a whole. We work from Loudoun all the way down through Spotsylvania, and we've helped conserve over 8,000 acres of valuable scenic, historic, natural lands. Also, we work on working lands, including in Loudoun. Just very excited to be part of this. We do a lot of work with HOAs. We hold community properties with HOAs and help manage them. And so we're always excited to get the word out on ways to do that more sustainably. Thanks.
Excellent, thanks. And thanks, Jen, for the introduction, and to all of our sponsors. I'll just run through some housekeeping here and then some introductions before we hand it off to our main speakers today. But first, thanks for being here. It's a beautiful Saturday, so I appreciate you spending your time with us. We're going to be recording the webinar, and you'll get a follow-up email with the recording, so look for that. Please use the chat feature for exchanging ideas and comments with each other during the presentations and such, and then we will have a short time for a Q&A at the very end of everything today. So please just go ahead and drop your questions into the chat feature at any time. We might not get to them right away, but Margaret's going to be helping to collect all of those so that we have time to address them later. And then we are going to be doing breakout room functionality where each of us will be able to get to spend some time in smaller groups discussing some strategies for doing this kind of work in our HOAs and condo associations. So I want to also just do a quick introduction of our presenters who you'll be hearing from today. Zach Lett is the Vice President of Land Planning and Design Associates, LPDA, and Zach leads their metro area office and is involved in the management and design of projects throughout the DC and Baltimore regions. Throughout his career, he's worked on a variety of projects, including mixed use, urban design and planning, community planning, institutional, parks, trails, and greenways. And LPDA has been assisting community associations throughout the region in the master planning, approvals, and implementation of landscape and capital improvements. Kyle Dingus is Loudoun County's urban forester. He has a forestry degree from Virginia Tech with a focus in forest resource management. And prior to working for the county, he served 5 years as an area forester for the Virginia Department of Forestry, covering Loudoun, Fauquier, Prince William, Culpeper, and Rappahannock counties. And he enjoys promoting forests and works with the motto of safe infrastructure and happy trees. And John McGee is the president of McGee Design. John's been designing and building landscapes in the Washington, DC area and beyond for the past 25 years. He owns and operates award-winning McGee Design in Middleburg, Virginia, and is the creator and host of the award-winning Native Plant podcast. And we'll drop the link to that in the chat box in a little bit. So here's the overall agenda for today. So we'll go through a bunch of things. I'll give an introduction. We'll hear from Zach. We'll do a short poll and a break. Then we'll hear from Kyle about trees and forest management. We'll do another breakout or first breakout group discussion there where we'll give you some questions to think about in your groups. We'll have room for another short break before we come back to hear from John McGee. We'll do more breakout group sessions. We can talk about some questions that John has posed for us, and then we'll have our Q&A. So we'll hop right into the introduction. I'm going to cover 4 things. Why are we here? To build on the introduction that Jem gave. Why we target community associations, how you might be able to think like a board member if you're not one already, and expectations for planning and managing. So why are we here? I want to borrow this example that Alonzo Abogadas, Arlington County's natural resource manager, has used, and I really like the visualization that it is. Have you ever done a puzzle where you were missing pieces and when you got to the end, you couldn't complete the picture that you were trying to put together? Or maybe even worse, somebody had taken puzzle pieces from a different puzzle and put them into your puzzle, so you kept getting confused that they were in there, and again, they weren't completing the puzzle you were aiming for. This is really similar to what's happened to our ecology. It's been flooded for hundreds of years by non-native plants and animals, which are the puzzle pieces of our ecology, and they've displaced at times the ones that have evolved here in our areas. And these plants and animals, they don't complete the puzzle of our ecology. So as we think about planning and managing for open space in your communities, how can we help by solving this puzzle? Solving the puzzle is way more fun than tearing it apart, I think. So I always like to say, just don't introduce puzzle pieces that will never fit with our ecology as kind of a first mantra. So as we think about why we're here too, really managing common space and open space affects so much. And one of the things it really affects is our water. Everything on our land, our water, and the air, they're all really intimately connected. And trees and natural vegetation can prevent erosion, and it can trap and slow pollutants that get into our water otherwise. And whatever is on the land is in our water. In order to have clean water to drink, you have to also protect the land that we live on. And our bodies are made of 60% water by weight. So whatever is in the water is in us, and our HOAs can be, and condo associations can be a component of really thinking about this aspect of it. When we look at the DC metro area, this is a image from 1984 and the impervious surface. So sidewalks, roads, roofs back in 84. And just 25 years later, the amount of impervious surface has increased significantly. I'll go back and forth so you can see the intensity that has increased. And this is due to the continued development, like you see in that upper right-hand corner. We're just adding more roofs, more roads, more parking lots as time goes on. So as we think about what else gets into our streams besides water, you can think about how our communities are a component of that as well. The salt that might be put down on the roads in the winter, any kind of fertilizer we put onto our lawns, the things left behind by our pets, trash, runoff, even the temperature of water that rushes across really hot parking lots in the summer can be really damaging to the ecology of streams. And as we think about planning and managing our common space and in a really ecologically minded fashion, it can really contribute to things over and above just the people that live there. We have canaries outside of the coal mine, giving us clear signs that we as humans can do more. Nearly 30% of all the birds have disappeared in just 50 years. And our communities are a great place to start to help reverse that trend. So you can start thinking now about how your community can be part of these broader ecological issues. And we have just a couple of them here as examples. How do we manage stormwater to prevent the degradation of our stream valleys? How do we think about preventing habitat loss due to invasive plants? And how do we manage our expansive lawn areas without chemicals to help prevent pollution in our waterways? So as we think about why community associations, HOAs are big places. These offer lots of opportunities to have impact at a really big scale. Some HOAs and condo associations are quite small, and some are effectively as big as small public works departments. So it's really helpful to think about, individual landowners can do a lot, but as a group, we can do even more. And HOAs and condo associations affect our ecology and watersheds at a really big scale. Decisions made at this level can have huge impacts, positive or negative, depending on the decisions being made. And communities can be good environmental allies with this in mind. And the boards that manage these community associations are run by residents like you. That's really powerful. You get to make the decisions about how property is managed and how the environment will benefit from those decisions. And that's good because it's about where you live. And when communities do programs like this and do different projects like this at scale on their common properties, it can often be inspiration for individual homeowners to do it as well on their own properties. So if you're not already a board member or a committee member, really shifting your thinking to think about a board member so you can think about how you might be able to get traction for doing really good things and helping to influence common area management in a more positive way can be really helpful. So I like to think about this as areas of common ground. That's not just a metaphor, but also the real common ground that you're going to be helping to influence. So build on those shared values to help achieve your goals. And what do I mean by that? Go to your board meetings. Listen to what's important to them. Listen to what's important to residents. Think about where your common ground is, your common property is, and your common goals might be. And how do you use that common ground, literally and figuratively, for ecological gain? So maybe you hear someone say they're going to replace the entrance signs and that's going to be coming up. Maybe that's an opportunity to think about how the landscaping around those entrance signs might be able to be re-landscaped with natives. Maybe you hear that there are some dead trees being removed. This is a really good time to maybe bring up a tree replacement policy, thinking about how you could use native trees to do the replacements here. And maybe succession over time as trees get older and maybe die in your community. Maybe there's an issue with standing water, and that's a really good opportunity to talk about where that water is coming from and how to manage stormwater better in your HOA. Another really helpful thing is to think about your community structure. So HOAs and condo associations are interesting beasts because they have governing documents, and understanding those legal covenants, your committee structures, and how they contribute to decision-making can be really helpful. These things are often adopted by the association. They typically only typically you can only do things that are supported by the goals in your declarations and bylaws and the enabling documents. They have to have the authority to actually create the committees that you want to create and such. So really understanding those can be key. And as you think about how you want to structure maybe rules or guidelines that you might want to put in place to help to have a more ecologically minded focus, it's really helpful to understand the relationship between some of these things. The harder to change things like bylaws and covenants are easier to enforce because they've really been codified into law in your community. But like I mentioned, they can be hard to change because you might need a lot of people to vote yes to those. And so some of the things that are easier to change, like committees or regulations or guidelines, can be harder to enforce. And that's where advocacy really comes in. So sometimes the things that might be easier to make movement on, you really need to get a much bigger groundswell to help support. So think about that as well. And as you think about expectations for planning and managing, it can really help you prepare what you have ahead of you as you become your own advocate in your community. So I want to go through a story about working within the bounds of your best chance to get success to achieve a positive ecological goal. In our HOA, I really was bothered by the amount of invasive plants. This is a picture from our common property where porcelain berry has completely covered the edge of this forest. So back in 2016, I approached our board. I mentioned this. I mentioned the threat to our trees. I made a compelling presentation, talked about how native plants are far better for ecology. And somebody brought up the issue that wouldn't native plants get eaten by the unimaginable number of deer that we have? And I said, yes, that's true. So what started off as an invasive plant campaign really evolved quickly into a let's advocate for deer management because our HOA is actually adjacent to a 60-acre park by the park authority that they manage. So we did a big campaign to get support in our community for deer management. So that happened in the fall of 2017. We got support for the deer management program through the park authority, and that was great. So we said, okay, this is the first step to invasive control, is to first control the deer to allow our habitat to regenerate. So in the next year, I came back to our board and said, hey, we got deer management. Here's a 40-page PowerPoint presentation. I looked at different communities that were also doing invasive management. I talked about budgeting. I laid out a map in our community about the different invasives that were there. I talked about the threats to our community, and it was very compelling. And the good news is we kept doing deer management through this second year as well. And the board was very supportive. We got a budget line item in the summer of 2019 to move forward with this invasive plant removal. And earlier this year, in January or February, was our first treatment of our porcelain berry. And this was from May, seeing how that treatment and the cutting back of the porcelain berry really helped. It took about 4 years to do this. It's a lot of advocacy and a lot of stick-to-itiveness, but that's okay. And this year, this was actually, this is from last month when we did our last September presentation. But last month, we had goldenrods coming out. We had asters coming up. These things were not there before. You remember that picture? It was just a carpet. They couldn't grow. So we are getting things regrowing. It's very exciting. So when a challenge stares you down and it seems like it's very comfortable blocking your way, just regroup and find a path forward. In my case, it was the overpopulation of deer and the need for a budget and for money. And those were two blocking issues, but we worked around them and it just took some time. So my story from my own HOA is not for discouragement. It's really about setting your expectations and really thinking about your continued advocacy. You can do it. It takes time, and that's okay. And it takes a lot of advocacy, maybe sometimes more than you expected. And it takes a wide range of people that need to be educated, and maybe about more than you expected. And at the end of the day, residents must be accepting of all of these things. So having those discussions can really help move these kinds of things forward. So I want to tell you about some resources we have. This is on Plant Nova Native's website. We'll drop this into the link, into the chat box as well. It's a great place to get information that you can use in your own HOA. We get feedback from sessions like this. We get ideas from sessions like this, and we continue to evolve this page thanks to Margaret's leadership. And there's an education packet for residents of community associations, which is really cool about how you can move initiatives forward. And there's a ton of other information on these pages as well. And also coming up, for those of you who do live in Loudoun County, Virginia specifically, I know there are lots of people who don't, but if you do, we also have a program coming up called Greening Your Neighborhood, really building on Piedmont Environmental Council's prior advocacy and really thinking about how you'll be able to take this kind of advocacy learning to your own HOA to successfully complete a project in your HOA by June of 2022. It's a kind of go at your own pace program where you get support from us at Audubon Naturalist Society. So we'd love to have you join us for that as well if you live in Loudoun County. And I'm going to hand it over to Zach for master planning.
Thanks, Renee. Get my screen shared here. All right, can everyone see my screen okay? Great. All right, well, thanks. I'd like to thank everybody for the time. It's a nice Saturday, so it's a nice time to be outside, but this is an important topic. My name is Zach Lett. I'm the Vice President and Principal of LPDA. We're a landscape architecture and planning firm here in Northern Virginia. Some information on the screen about kind of my background and some of the HOAs we've worked with here locally. I think the big thing here is that a number of, as an industry, we've seen a big interest by HOAs in the last really 7 or 8 years to start looking at their outdoor infrastructure. A lot of, as Renee mentioned, a lot of these HOAs in the region are massive. Some of them are the size of small towns, all the way through small condominium associations. So we're seeing it both from an improvement standpoint, but really an interest and a focus in just general community betterment. I attribute that to solid real estate prices and just more awareness of folks to the outdoors, particularly under situations like we're in right now with COVID. Just outdoor recreation, that focus has shifted. So what engages a community to do a master plan? And really, that's where our involvement has come in with communities and HOAs the last few years. The picture here kind of tells a story. This is a HOA in the district that we work with called McLean Gardens. It's a campus of condominiums. It's a historic community. They have a major drainage and irrigation issue. So this was in August, I believe. We had one of our big rainstorms, and this was one of their outdoor spaces that somebody took a photo of. So what engages the community? Maintenance cost. If you ever examine your HOA's budget, the landscape maintenance is usually in your top 3 line items, just according to what kind of community you have. Dated landscapes. Landscapes can be successional and things wear out and need to be replaced. Dissatisfaction with aesthetics, similar. Dated amenities, what I refer to as spot improvement. So one issue we see with a lot of HOAs are one board or one group or committee wanting to fix something, and then the next board group, they kind of focus on something else. So it's not a cohesive group of improvements. And then a major infrastructure breakdown. We have worked for HOAs that have had major infrastructure breakdowns, like a structural failure of a parking deck or garage or drainage issue. So what are the benefits of developing a master plan for a community association? Really, the summary of it is it gives long-term guidance that outlives boards and committees. As Renee mentioned, that her invasive management program in her community has taken 4 to 5 years to really get off the ground. And that's indicative of what we see with homeowners associations and trying to do improvement plans. It's a 6-7 year initiative, and it needs to be. These things take time. So it provides guidance for near and long-term budgeting. It demonstrates community investment. And we've seen a lot of positive aspects of that in the case study that I'm going to show you today. It engages new community membership, which is important. And it's a renewed focus on community assets. People really understanding what they have in their community. We generally see homeowners associations engage in what I would consider to be 2 types of plans. The first one being capital improvement planning, or CIP plan. Really, that's changes in programming. So we see, conversions of tennis courts to pickleball, removal of underutilized amenities like a basketball court per se, new amenities. Dog parks are incredibly popular right now amongst the HOAs that we work with. Expanded programs, so focus on user groups. The picture here on the screen is actually a new facility we built as a phase 1 for the Cascades Community Association. That's the kind of hub for their swim team. They have a massive swim league. I think they have over 400 participants annually, and they stored things in shipping containers previously. So this is where they're housed out of. Now there's some concessions and some additional storage for the HOA. Major renovations, newer expanded community spaces as well as something we see. Maintenance planning is the second type of capital or master plan that we see. And a lot of that tends to go with a lot of the issues we have with landscape ecology here in Northern Virginia related to invasive species. What I would consider to be new invasives like Bradford pear. A lot of communities in this region that was planted as the predominant tree, street trees, trees in people's yards. And old invasives, things have been hanging around for a while like kudzu, which I know in our work in Fairfax County, particularly around Vienna, Tyson's Corner area, is incredibly aggressive invasive. Life cycle replacements we see, so replacing playgrounds, furnitures and fixtures, lighting, that sort of thing. And then what I would consider to be inefficiencies in maintenance. Mulch. Landscape contractors love mulch. I don't know why. They love to use it. You know, just expanding bed sizes or removing bed sizes, things that require too much maintenance. And access. We see a lot of HOAs where they're accessing dangerous locations to maintain a bed of petunias. There's a better way to do it. You know, as with any type of improvement, there are limitations. So there are budgetary limitations to communities. And if we go into one of the breakout rooms, I can talk a little bit more about this. But a lot of times there, you know, can you get interest? Is there a lack of interest in the community? Sometimes we have what we call the squeaky wheel situation where there's one person or two people that have an initiative. Can you get the whole community behind that? And can you get a quorum to get a vote, to get a budgetary change, as Renee was mentioning, to actually get an initiative to happen? And then there are bylaws and jurisdictional regulations as well. You know, most of the trees and most HOAs, especially if you live in a smaller HOA, if it's not in a natural area, that's probably a required tree. That's probably been planted by some county or city ordinance that requires that vegetation to be there. So expected outcomes, you know, as I mentioned, it's a guideline for future development and modernization of amenities. Our McLean Gardens project in DC, we just had that board flip last week. First time we been involved with these guys for 3 years, we just had a board flip. So now we're reintroducing the new board to the master plan and those initiatives. You know, successional landscape replacement is another outcome that you'll see. Successional amenity replacement, you just being heads up about changing things out that need replaced over time, and reduction in efficiencies in maintenance. So the first case study, actually, I changed my presentation from the last HOA presentation. I'm just going to focus on Cascades this time. Cascades is here in Eastern Loudoun County. I was a resident of Cascades for a long time. It's really close to our office. It's 2,500 acres and 6,500 homes. It's a big HOA. In fact, it's the biggest in Loudoun County. It's probably one of the largest in the state of Virginia. It has 6 community facilities, 5 of which have swimming pools. 90% of the community is walkable to those facilities within a mile walk or radius. They have an extensive trail network. And just talking about community awareness, when we got into this, a lot of people were unaware of the trail network. Their community, however, maintains several large boulevards. Cascades Parkway, Palisades Parkway, Potomac View Road, and Algonquian Parkway are all minor arterial roadways. They're 4-lane roadways that this HOA is maintaining. So as Renee pointed out, these guys are like a small public works department, if not a normal sized public works department. The first plan we did for Cascades was their capital improvement plan, which really their focus was they looked at their amenities and they said, how do we extend these uses? How do we give people more access to these uses, but beyond the typical pool season, as we refer to it? So what they looked at there was replacing old uses and putting new amenities into their community centers and their public spaces that didn't exist now. So we use the example of bocce was an example. Or social spaces. Right now when the pool's closed, there's not a lot of social activity that happens amongst neighbors in that community unless they're at each other's individual homes, or what we do in my neighborhood, we stand in the middle of the street. Let's see here. Sorry, my phone rang. Examined over park uses. One thing we've seen with a lot of communities is that their clubhouse spaces are over parks, or conversion of those uses, as we were looking for a reduction in impervious cover. And more awareness about the neighboring trail systems as well. So this project had a 5 to 7 year implementation strategy. We're in the 3rd year of now. I threw this graphic up just anecdotally to show here. If you can see this graphic on my screen, everything that's green is common space, or red, owned by the HOA. Everything that's tan or white is actually private property or public right of way. So there's a big misconception in Cascades over who owned what. And we see that with a lot of HOAs, who controls and who maintains what. So in their master planning process, what we really look for what we would consider to be opportunity zones. This is one of their amenity areas. And this whole facility was overparked. So the purple shaded area on the plan, we looked at converting that. There was still an interest in tennis, basketball, the pool and clubhouse is obviously staying, but this middle portion of their community is getting, or their community center is getting redone. This is another plan that, that looked at extending the pool use. Currently the pool deck ends here on the right-hand side of the page. So we added some gathering spaces where we have some removable fencing that's going to actually provide an opportunity for outdoor congregation in a time of the year like this, where it's still nice outside. People can still use this facility, where, you know, currently on the weekend after Labor Day, it's quiet until Memorial Day. We actually put a drone up last week on this. So this is their clubhouse. This is their phase 1 project. This is Cascade's largest open space, community center. And this is the new building. We've redone fencing, we've redone lighting. We put a PA system in for the swim team, which wasn't currently there, along with the lighting. So it allows their swim meets to get longer use. We've added the new deck. This building wasn't accessible to the back. It had an ADA accessibility issue that we fixed. And we're currently in the process of replacing the playground. So here's a couple shots of that. The second project we've done for Cascades is the landscape master plan. And again, this was kind of a focus of what we called really an attention to maintenance and the amount of time that their landscape contractor and the money that they were spending on this. As I mentioned, I lived in the community for a long time. I still live adjacent to the community, and I swear their landscape contractors mulch from Valentine's Day to Memorial Day. Those guys were out there mulching everything. So what we looked at was what areas we would consider to be underplanted and over-maintained, areas where there were beds that there just wasn't enough vegetation. We've reviewed solutions for severely eroded slopes. They have an issue with erosion on a lot of their highway areas, their roadway areas. Reduction of mowed areas. I mean, it's crazy. For 30 years, they were mowing down a 3-to-1 slope to a wood line that nobody ever saw. So just from a maintenance and an operations standpoint, how do we reduce that? Reforestation, which I'm going to show some pictures of the implementation of that, and then long-range planning for median and parkway planning. They want to look at, you know, landscaping their medians and landscaping the roads that I mentioned that they're maintaining before. So this is the relationship diagram and the topologies of how we broke their landscape down. There's really roadway landscape, pedestrian landscape, and vegetative edge. One thing I want to talk about with pedestrian landscape is you know, it is key to communities that we keep visuals or visibility to walkways. It's a safety issue. People feel safe in those areas. So this is something we focused on a lot with the community is like, okay, we do realize that we want to revegetate this area, but are we going to maintain the safety that has been prevalent over, you know, the last 30 years the community's been in existence? So these are a lot of the area solutions we came up with. This is actually a cross section of the Cascades Parkway up high. That road sets up high. There's 3-to-1 slopes in and out of it in both directions, and they've mowed that for 30 years. They've literally mowed these 3-to-1 slopes for 30 years and cut up to the forest line. So you have the HOAs, maintenance crews in there cutting a lot of grass and maintaining a lot of space that isn't usable landscape. It's just customary. That's what they've done. So that's where we've deviated. This is a shot we took with our drone last week. The shadows are not doing any justice, so I'll highlight it here in just a second. But the highlighted area in green is reforestation. So we've taken this area and we've allowed this to revegetate with seedlings and tubes, and they've stopped mowing it. They quit mowing it in the spring, and they've continued to not mow it. I walked it all this week. I would say that probably 70% of the vegetation is sustained. The rest is not. The red line is their trail system. So you can kind of see the relationship of the road, this 3-to-1 slope we've allowed to revegetate, and the trail system. Here's a shot of it up close, what it looks like. You can see where they stopped mowing it. Some of the whips and seedlings coming up. Here's an additional shot of it. I did notice some invasive species in the lower layer here that I've since sent an email for them to look at. Here's some other solutions they've come up with, and this looks like a pretty simple picture, but this is also a pretty simple solution. what we've done here is we've built these rubble walls to retain erosion where this whole area used to completely erode out before. So it's creating these soil pockets to allow this vegetation to stay here, where previously what would happen is this would gut out in big rain events and they would come back and add riprap. So where do we start? I think the key thing is to identify who needs and wants to be involved, who are the stakeholders, and who are the volunteers. And I use the example of the yellow bubble, probably the best, as the best example. You've got to make sure you get a cross section of stakeholders if you're going to go into a master planning process. Are the folks on your committees, do they represent a cross section of the folks that live in your community? I can't stress that enough, because if you have a group, and I don't want to pick on retired people that are pushing these initiatives, and then you have working families in your community, I've seen that blow up. I don't like to use that as a case study. So make sure that we have a good cross section of people that are represented throughout the community. It'll be easier to get your initiatives pushed forward. Do you have realistic expectations on public outreach? Can you get people to come out to meetings and talk about things? Or are you a digital platform? I know COVID throws a wrench in that, but are you a digital platform community, or do people want to come out and talk? Do people want to walk areas, like with Renee's example of what she dealt with in her community? Can you get a group of stakeholders to go walk that? And then really to identify what your projects are and prioritize those over time. It's a great starting point to have that kit of parts together before you start talking to a consultant. I guess some other key examples of successful outcomes it's HOAs have big budgets. It's tough sometimes to get things constructed. And reality is if you're going through a master planning process, the ultimate goal, right, is to get to construction so people can actually see changes, whether it's new site furnishings or you build a large park, is really to have construction. That's really what we're after. So look at creative contract vehicles. Can you work with your existing maintenance contractors to do some of this work? Or is your project significant enough to go through a design build process where you do design documents, and then you bid that construction out? Or do you have a contractor that you can trust, that you can work with? And I use the example of playground replacements for this. For the most part, playground replacements would be done through a design build relationship with a contractor. You wouldn't bid that work out per se. I guess some more keys to successful outcomes, and I think the green circle probably is the most important one, is make sure you develop a budget that you can fund within a manageable timeline. So if the goal is to spend $50,000 a year or $250,000 a year, make sure that that's something that the community can continue to fund over time. Develop that financial implementation plan and stick with it. Make sure you maintain flexibility in your financials. As anybody knows that's ever done anything in construction, what you think it's going to cost and what it actually costs usually ends up changing. Your master plan should be static. Once the community goes through this process and you've got your goals in mind, stick with it. But understand that your implementation strategies have to be dynamic. Things change, budgets change, economies change, and that's where that has to be important. With that, I will turn it back over to Renee.
Thanks so much, Zach. We have time for a short poll for everybody just before we go to a 5-minute break. So I'll hand it over to Marco for the poll. There we go.
Sure.
Thank you so much, Marco.
You should see it pop up on your screens now, and go ahead and answer. For this one, just keeping it simple, just one answer, even if you have multiple.
This will help us see who everybody is that's here, whether you're joining us today from a community association, or are you just a resident, which is a great role to be in because you don't have any needs to stay balanced about what you desire from your HOA, like some board members need to have. Or if you're on a committee or leading the HOA as well.
Just give it another 15 seconds here. Looks like about 80% of the people here have answered so far. All right, go ahead and end it for now. You can see, you should be able to see the results now.
Excellent. It's a good spread of people. Thanks so much, Marco.
Yeah.
So we're going to head into a short break. Let's take 5 minutes. It's 1:43 right now. So let's say 1:48, come on back. And we'll see you in 5 minutes. Machine here. So we'll dive back into the agenda. And next up, we have Kyle Dingus talking about HOA trees and forest management.
All righty. Well, thank you very much. And welcome to everyone here today. We really appreciate you spending your Saturday afternoon with us. And it always does our hearts very good to see other enthused conservationists. So really and sincerely, thank you for being with us today. And I'm excited. So let's dive right in here. So I'm going to be giving a county perspective on HOA trees and forest management. And I serve as the Loudoun County Urban Forester. And my role essentially is to be the subject matter expert on trees and forest for the county and the government and its functions and things like that. A lot of my job is reviewing development applications. And I always like to tell people we want safe infrastructure and happy trees. Trees are a wonderful asset to our communities, but we have to do a lot of careful planning before we put them in the landscape, because if you have a tree that isn't going to do well on a site or it's going to struggle, it can be costly for the parcel owner. But if you have a tree that's planted correctly in the right spot, that thing's going to vibe and do a lot of good things for our community. So safe infrastructure and happy trees. And also I get involved with a lot of other departments in the county to help them with tree and forest related issues. And I also take questions from the public and assist HOAs and other landholding entities to navigate through our regulations. So our outline for the day is we are going to give a little background on trees and forests in Loudoun County. Loudoun County is a great place to be a tree nerd. And in fact, you know, I've been all over the Commonwealth. And I can tell you, I would put Loudoun County up against any county in Virginia for the diversity of trees we have and some of the awesome specimen trees we can grow as well. So we have a lot of cool things to celebrate here in Loudoun County. Then we're going to talk about setting up for success. And then finally working with the county. So first, let's get started. Background on trees and forests in Loudoun. You know, again, I'm probably going to say this a couple different times. This is a great place to be a tree nerd. We have a lot of cool things going on. Looking at it bigger picture wise, we're really an ecological crossroads because we're kind of being in the Piedmont area. We have species from the mountains and the coastal plain kind of mingling and some of our Piedmont species as well. Loudoun in and of itself, it has a very diverse geography, which makes a lot of cool implications for the types of trees we can grow here. So, you know, let's first talk about basic tree biology. Friends, this is something I always like to start with just because I've noticed that tree biology is not very well understood by a lot of members of the public. So let's just dive into this real quick. So really, friends, trees really aren't nothing but a bunch of little old straws. That's all they are. They're just an amazing bunch of living straws. They grow very specifically. So they basically grow out every year in diameter. Technically, they get fatter. And then they also grow at their twig tips and their root tips. And, you know, they're very, very long-lived organisms, but essentially you have the canopy, which has the leaves, which are the food-making factories for the tree. It produces sugars. The sugars then go down the stem into the roots. The roots are basically the bank account of a tree. So if a tree has a very good root system, if a tree gets defoliated prematurely one year, it usually can bounce back. They also, as we all know, produce rings. They technically produce 2 rings a year. So they basically produce really wide rings in the spring in order to shoot a lot of water up to the canopy to start photosynthesis. And then as the year goes on and we get into this time of year, their rings get smaller and smaller and smaller. So when you look at a cross-sectional area of a tree, you count in between the rings to get the age. But I want y'all to think of trees as just like little businesses. That's how they run themselves. You know, they have to have maintenance costs to keep their components functioning. They also have to put money in the bank, which basically means they have to send it down to the roots, expand out, and have some optimal growth. So one other thing I'll mention is trees don't heal. They do a process called sealing. So when a tree gets a wound, it basically grows over it and walls that wound off to prevent it from getting infected. So a very interesting way that trees do things. So the why trees grow, again, I alluded to this in the last slide, they basically need light, water, nutrients, and space. And light is one of the biggest keys to growth when we talk about landscape level management, just because light is something that we can most easily manipulate. So each tree has its own built-in light preference. Some of you have gone to nurseries before, or even sometimes if you go to some of the big box stores and you pull up a plant and you look at the tag, it'll have a little sun icon, full sun, partial sun, full shade, something like that. Each tree has a built-in preference. But also trees in the forest environment are in competition with each other. So the graphic on the right shows the dominant, co-dominant, intermediate, and suppressed trees. So one way you can look at a forest is just a big tree competition. The biggest and baddest trees are typically the largest. They've won the race to the sun. They have the biggest trunk diameter, and they usually have the biggest canopies. And then you have the co-dominants and the other ones underneath that. Succession drives forest development. And one of the biggest roles of a forester is to understand the successional cycles in nature to make educated guesses on forest manipulation and forest development and how that's going to play out over time. One interesting thing, which we'll go into a little bit more detail, is if you look at this graphic and you look from left to right, there's some stuff that makes sense and there may be other stuff that makes no sense. Like we start out with grassland, grass shrub, pine forest. Well, then, whoa, we go from pines to hardwoods. Well, how the heck is that possible? So we'll run through an example of that. But the biggest thing here is that they change over time. And that's really, really important to understand. Forests do not stay the same. They will change. They just do it over tens and sometimes hundreds of years. But with our understanding of forest succession, we can make pretty good educated guesses on how a forest is going to change. So again, gonna belabor this point one more time. They're not statues. They do stuff over time. So the forest on the left is kind of our baby or early successional forest. As the process of competition goes on, you get less stems per acre, bigger trees, and then finally you would start to see an understory developed. Having an understory is one of the signs of maturity of our forest. So let's just kind of look at how our trees get here and some of our historical legacies here in the Virginia Piedmont. So when the colonists first got over here from Europe, we started figuring out what crops we could grow here once they found out what tobacco was. You know, actually, fun fact, the king originally signed the charter for the Virginia Company for the promise of timber resources, but the economics of shipping timber from the East Coast to England are terrible. So then they figured out that they could grow tobacco, and that kind of took off and became a big staple. So looking at the agricultural heritage, the first land, the best land always goes to ag because we have to feed ourselves. And that was a big economic engine at the time. So you would see this big dynamic of we'd put all this land in agriculture, and soil science and agronomy at that time wasn't very well understood. So they weren't really the best at crop rotation or even soil stabilization practices. So you'd have dynamics where the land would get used up and then it would revert back to forest. So in addition to that, you also had historical events which put pressure on the economy and society that basically prompted what we call land abandonment periods. So two of the biggest ones here close to home, especially in Loudoun County, one would be the Civil War. The other was the Great Depression, where these two events basically drove people off their properties because of hard economic times or just promise of a better life. So one of the case in points to this is if you go to most Civil War battlefields, like if you go just down the road to Manassas, you'll see that a lot of it is forest, where at the time of the battle it was not. The Great Depression was another time period where, again, hard economic and social times drove people off their property. So we're going to kind of summarize this into two scenarios. You know, if we have land before it was abandoned, it was probably either a crop field or a pasture of some sort. Crop field, being that we're kind of assuming it's a lot, you know, more bare soil at the time of abandonment once a crop has been harvested. And the pastures, of course, has that grass component. So your crop fields, typically what happens is, and we see this a lot in eastern Loudoun, where it's a lot flatter and it was easier to do crops, is as those crop fields were abandoned, they were colonized by pines, and most notably Virginia pine. I like to call Virginia pines their party trees. They live fast and they die young. That's what a pioneer species does in nature. So as these pines colonize these bare soil crop areas, and they started to die out around age 50 to about around age 100, which really isn't that old for trees, you had secondary successional species such as oaks start to take over. Oaks are a shade intermediate loving species. So they're an indicator of a secondary succession. So again, a lot of our forests in eastern Loudoun, and if some of you are from Fauquier, we see this in southern Fauquier. We see this progression of pines to hardwoods, whereas now modern day, past these two abandonment periods, we have a lot of secondary successional forests. And actually, if you look at the data from the Virginia Department of Forestry Forest Inventory Analysis, I believe over 50% of our forests in Virginia are secondary successional oak and hickory forest. Now, when we look at pastures, we have this grass component. And let me tell you what, grass and trees don't like each other. Grass is kind of a nasty thing for trees to deal with because some of it is allelopathic and it actually exudes chemicals that inhibit other plants from establishing. So your species palette is going to be different in the pasture abandonment scenario because trees like oaks and hickories typically don't do well competing with grass, but trees like maples and soft mass producing trees like cherries, hackberries, some of your other elms, eastern red cedars, a case child for pasture abandonment. When I'm teaching this to folks, I typically call these poop forests because they're usually spread by our wildlife friends. But you basically get a different dynamic, mixed hardwoods. This is what we would see in the western part of Loudoun County, where we're a lot hillier and rockier, and just the economics of necessity where, hey, instead of, trying to till this rocky land, we're going to grow cattle and in a lot of cases, orchards as well. So that's just giving you a little bit of an understanding about how forests develop. Of course, there's some other instances, but here's some issues we see pretty commonly in Loudoun County. Unfortunately, we do have a lot of invasives. We're on the lookout right now for spotted lanternfly. So if you suspect that, please contact the extension office. We are seeing the ravages of emerald ash borer. But really, we have a lot of invasive plants, and the picture on the right is probably one of the worst cases I've ever seen. This tract, I believe, had about 13 different invasives with little to no native seed sources. So whenever we're thinking about control, I always tell people, please focus on your invasive vines, your Oriental bittersweet, your Japanese honeysuckle first, because they will kill existing trees. And I have seen whole forests fail and whole plantings fail because the vines weren't taken care of. So after you knock the vines back down, then you can get the ones that take up space, like your autumn olive, your tree of heaven, things like that. Deer. A deer is basically a stomach with 4 legs sticking out of it. They're voracious eaters. We'll have to keep them in check. Invasives in deer are 2 of our biggest problems. And also lack of habitat diversity. We're missing things in our landscape such as early successional habitat. One important thing I recommend you all do is get some type of a forest management plan. Either you can reach out to the Virginia Department of Forestry, or you can reach out to a consulting forester. But a forest management plan is incredibly important. It is going to identify your objectives. It's going to then identify in the plan your resources and the potential for the wildlife habitat, the soils, the recreational potential that you state to the forester that you're interested in. And it's also going to break the forest into different stands or types. So it's important because if you have a poplar forest, you manage that differently than an oak forest, which you then manage differently than a pine forest. So you have to know what you have. It's great for you to go out and invasive control, and I encourage you to do that, but please make sure it's within the context of a plan because you have to get all your ducks in a row. It's also going to provide guidance on recommendations and a management schedule as well. And some of these plans, to the best of my knowledge, the Virginia Department of Forestry has one called Neighborhood Forest Management Plan. And the last time I checked, that was free of charge. So please contact your local Department of Forestry forester. Also wanted to add 5 things to do for trees and forests. For trees, have a management goal, get the tree assessed, follow up with needed tasks, monitor the tree, and plan carefully before adding more trees. Right tree, right place. For your forest, it's almost the same thing. Have a management goal, get a plan, follow the plan, assess the progress of the plan, and then develop some lesson learned. You know, when you start doing invasive control, you'll realize some things work better than others, and that's really important. So with proper management, you know, it really treats the forest like an ecosystem. It allows you to do things within the native ecology of the site. You can get your habitat provided if you're looking for things like that, and your landowner objectives accomplished as well. And the picture on the right is a vegetative response from deer hunting on a property. This is almost an endangered species in the Nova area, and that's oak seedlings. But we know that they can grow with hunting pressure, and we'll get some natives as well. So setting up for success for managing your trees and forests, you know, in your neighborhoods, get a tree inventory and or neighborhood forest management plan put together. Know your priorities for your work towards clear goals, and formulate high-risk tree protocols, and always have an arborist on call to assist when you have a high risk or a hazard tree. Budget for tree work. The easiest way for my jaw to drop is when I talk to HOAs and they said, oh yeah, we've not budgeted for tree stuff. Yeah, please do that. That's important. And remember, trees appreciate as they age, but you also have to invest in tree care as well, because that will save you a lot of money down the road. And also encourage good tree care for your residents as well. So encourage them to have their trees well taken care of and assessed, especially by a certified arborist. So in the county, approved development plans must be followed. This is very important. What I always tell the HOAs I work with, please reach out to me before you're doing a bunch of work, because we don't want to see you get a zoning violation for taking out required vegetation or disturbing areas that shouldn't have been disturbed. So you have to think about, you know, what is on your approved site plan? Are there any other conditions or proffers that were associated with that? And here you can see we have tree conservation areas, canopy requirements, street tree requirements. If it's shown on the plan, it has to be there. So please work with us to help navigate that. Our tree conservation areas are typically what's going to be the forested areas and some of your common spaces, and it has to be shown on an approved site plan. These have certain implications for management. A high-risk tree can be removed without our permission, but I do appreciate a courtesy notification in case I get complaints. Most importantly, we do not own or maintain them. We do not. This is just a property that is privately owned that we hold regulations on. So some realities of all this, friends, you have to understand that trees are long-lived and they don't do things quickly. So usually your trees along the edge of a development don't start declining until 2 to 5 years after the development's been built out. So you have to anticipate a delayed response from trees. Most issues are highly preventable, but take forethought typically years before. Right tree, right place, good planning, good early tree care. Trees and forests cost money, should always be budgeted for. And really, when you take care of everything, it's a precious gift for future generations. And you need to have a plan. Have a plan, have a plan, have a plan, please. It's great for y'all to go out and do all these good things, but it has to be within the larger context of what we're trying to accomplish. So we do get into some zoning violations sometimes. I get pulled in as a subject matter expert. The picture on the right is somebody that has taken the liberty of clearing out a tree conservation area and putting some gardening structures in there. We want folks to be proactive. We want to be proactive on this. We can answer questions about possible violations. And typically when we do have one, we typically try to get people in voluntary compliance first. We are a complaint-based investigation system. So again, a complaint-based investigation system. So until we get a complaint, we're not going to investigate, which means that, we can answer questions and hopefully head things off. If complaints do come in, they have to be through our Loudoun Express request. When people complain, the complainant could go to court, and violations always go to the parcel owner, who, regardless of who did what. So that's just some of our zoning semantics there. Again, I just get pulled in on these because I'm the subject matter expert, and I typically help the zoning inspectors on these types of cases. So in order to avoid these, please contact us before so we can get you in the right direction. So rounding everything out, working with the county. Friends, we have an open door policy. You can contact me at any time for assistance. And I would say when in doubt, please call. I help HOAs all around the county. I have HOAs call me and tell on themselves that, oh my gosh, such and such person cleared part of a tree conservation area. What do we do? And I work with them and can answer questions. We can set up meetings to go over your requirements. I have done that multiple times. We want you to understand what you need to do and what requirements you have on your community. We want to be proactive. And really my role is I can help you figure out the implications from a regulatory standpoint. I'm not like the Department of Forestry where I can come out and give you management recommendations. I'm more for helping navigate our regulations. But we have an open door. Please contact me. What we do not do, we do not do tree inspections on private property. Do not call me and say, hey, can you come out and do a risk assessment on our neighborhood trees? We don't do that. We have to stick to our own property. So that would be handled by a certified arborist of the HOA. We don't give permission to mitigate hazard trees because it's not needed. Again, I appreciate if you have a tree in a county easement or a tree conservation area, again, you don't have to get my permission to mitigate the hazard, but I do appreciate a courtesy email or phone call, just so in case I get complaints, I can head those off. As you all know, sometimes when chainsaws start going off in HOAs, the county gets a lot of calls. We do not manage trees we do not own, but we still regulate them. So case in point is our tree conservation areas. Please don't tell your residents we own these, because we don't. That's on the HOA or the parcel owner, but we do regulate them. So certain activities still have to be within the regulations. Finally, we don't get involved in civil disputes that don't involve our regulations or our property. So sometimes people will call me and try to leverage me for tree complaints against their neighbors where it has nothing to do with our regulations. That's not our role. I'll typically point people to, their attorneys and a consulting arborist, which could help them navigate that. So the bottom line, friends, in all this, again, we have an open door policy. We're here to help landowners with your questions. When in doubt, please contact us. We are happy to help. We are here for you. We want you to succeed. We want you to do all your conservation projects. We're a complaint-driven investigation system. So again, if something is in our Lex request and we're investigating it, then eventually, we can make people do remedial actions. If it's not in a complaint, then I can answer questions and assist as much as I can. Please be familiar with your own county requirements to ensure that all the rules are followed. Again, we would not want to see a situation where you go do all this work and then we get a complaint and say, you took out a row of required street trees and you got to put them back. So again, please contact us. And also let me know if you have any comments or concerns about our rules and regulations. I always want to make sure that we are looking at things through the best lens and understanding how our regulations are impacting our citizenry. Periodically, we look at updating our zoning ordinance, which we're doing right now, and our facility standards manual. So if you're seeing things in the field that don't make sense, or you're seeing stuff that you just want to comment on, please let me know. I do track those comments. And then when we go to look at our ordinance and regulation rewrites, I do make every effort to bring those up so that we can talk about those. So friends, that's all I have. Here is my contact information. Again, really appreciate you being with us here today, and look forward to seeing some of you in the breakouts.
Thanks so much, Kyle. I also wanted to thank everybody for putting their questions in the chat box. Margaret's collecting those, so we'll definitely get to those that are a little bit longer, have more in-depth answers. We'll get to those at the end. And thanks for everybody else who chimed in and to share the answers for the faster ones. We'll dive into some breakout group discussions now, and I'm going to drop some questions into the chat box, which you can use for the breakout sessions. One of our sponsors or speakers will be your facilitator in the breakout groups. And so we'll be helping to take notes and such, but really the questions that we've gotten from Zach and Kyle here that I've included in the chat box, they're really meant to spur thoughts about your own community and the things that you can be thinking about in terms of master planning and trees. So I'll hand it over to Marco.
Great, thanks. We have 6 rooms. So hopefully there are about 5 participants in each. Give you plenty of time to discuss. I'll try to pay attention to the rooms in case anyone has questions or something doesn't work. But for now, I will go ahead and launch these rooms, and we'll get you guys situated.
That's great. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a good discussion about those questions. That was a fast time to go through them, but hopefully it just started sparking some ideas about how you can start bringing these ideas back to your community and engaging more people. But we're going to give you another 5-minute break now, just to relax your minds after that. So I have my clock 2:32, so we will take 5 minutes and be back here at 2:37. We'll see you in 5 minutes. So we're going to dive into John McGee's presentation for considerations for native plants. John, are you with us?
He's still on. John, you're on mute.
He might just be wrapping up his 5-minute break.
Yeah, if he's there, he's still on mute.
Hello.
There we go. We can hear you now.
Am I on?
Oh, you are. And actually, I'm sorry. I forgot that, Marco, we were going to do one more poll. So we'll actually get to you in a second, John. Sorry about that. We have one second poll that will take about 1 minute. And so, Marco, actually, could you fire it up for us?
I can. Yeah, I'll give you another sec, John, to get ready to share your screen. Launch.
Thanks for giving us that second to remember that we wanted to do that.
All right, there you go. This is about, the question is, what do you see as your community's biggest ecological need? So give us about a minute to answer that.
And we know that a lot of people have multiple needs. So we'll see if you can just pick one for today as your primary one.
It looks like about half of you have answered so far. Give us another 20 seconds or so for the rest of you to give us an answer here.
come rushing back to your computer if you're not here to get part of the poll.
All right. Well, it looks like we still have some folks who haven't answered yet, but I think just for time's sake, go ahead and end the poll and share the results here.
Looks like we have some equal winners in invasive plant management and long-term planning and master planning. So that's great. These are all good topics for today. Thanks so much, Marco.
Mm-hmm.
We'll hand it over to John.
Well, very good. Let me hit my slideshow here. Oops. I need to share my screen first. Okay. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about different ways of managing HOA common grounds. And I used to live in Herndon, Virginia, right across from Frying Pan Park, if you're familiar with it. And I think this is Monroe Manor, which is on Monroe Street behind Frying Pan Park. And we used to walk our dogs over here. And if you remember back to the beginning of our symposium with Renee's slide of the water falling from the sky down onto the mountains and through the pretty trees and the meadows and down into the creek, you know, that's kind of the cycle of life in a nutshell. There is water recirculating through the system. And so what we're seeing in this picture, unfortunately, is water falling from the sky, hitting an asphalt shingle, running off into a gutter, and then the downspout out to turf grass. And I'd be willing to bet money that every one of these homes is treating their lawn with fertilizers and pesticides and herbicides. So that's all then washing down into this common area, which, you know, if this was all planted as a nice wet meadow or something with a pretty boardwalk going through it, that's one thing. But basically just all that pollution is running off and down into the stream, and Difficult Run is over here, and that runs down into the Potomac and out to the bay. And so we're all downstream from somebody. So if we can get away from doing this type of landscaping and go more with a diverse set of plantings and biofiltration, you know, you still have all those houses over here on the right of this picture, but on the left, this is all basically riparian buffer along the lake. And so it keeps a lot of that stuff out of there and gets a cleaner water into our systems. Now, other people have already talked about invasive species, so I'll go through this really quickly, but I really think this is the #1 management threat to HOAs. You can do all the native plantings you want to, but if you don't have a good management plan against battling the invasive species, you're not going to have a successful execution of the plan. And, you know, this is kudzu. This is down in the south. You know, this is an ecological disaster, what we're looking at here. This is the wiping out of biodiversity and the creation of a monoculture. And, you know, we're living through the time of COVID at the moment. And, you know, this is the forest COVID is kudzu. So we're pretty much in the same spot. This is across the street from my house. This is Russian olive, which is probably the worst shrub around this area. And the thing that makes me sad is that, you know, landscapers still plant this plant. Nursery centers still sell this plant. You can still buy kudzu in places. I saw Japanese knotweed for sale just the other day in the nursery. And, you know, it's kind of like, come on, guys, let's get a part of this. And this actually is the picture of a garden center because, you know, how do we get these plants into our landscapes? And I think humans tend to say, you know, whatever's greener on the other side of the fence is better than what's on my side of the fence. And so, you know, we've been importing plants to the country since European colonization. And, you know, these are these are miscanthus grasses that you see here, and they're in seed. And, you know, there's literally thousands and thousands of seed per plant in this picture. And right down at the bottom, there's a stream, and all these seeds are overhanging that stream. And, you know, they're going to throw those seed in there, and then that's going to go downstream and spread into another place. And, you know, there's great native alternatives to these Asian grasses. And so it'd be nice to see people getting rid of them in their pallets. But, you know, there's no law against it at the moment. And so we're still seeing it for sale and spec'd into job sites. I see miscanthus grass go into landscaping jobs every day. So this is at Camp High Road behind my house in Middleburg, Virginia. And it's similar to what you would see in a subdivision, because you've got a disturbed area. You know, a builder came in, removed the forest, leveled things off, regraded everything. And, you know, you can see where it borders the forest here, you've got a lot of invasions coming in. And so, again, if we're planting non-native plants, they're escaping into the wild and decimating our forest. We don't want to do that. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is basically the basic stuff, getting everyone on board. It's a very important part of selling the idea. Managing people's expectations. I'm not going to talk to you guys about budget, but I'm going to mention it because budget's always very important. And not only do you need a budget for installation, but you need a budget for maintenance, and you need a budget for watering during the first couple of years. So just things that we talked a little bit about budget in our breakout group. Seasonal interest, very important. We live in a temperate climate. Unfortunately, for some reason, everybody's kind of addicted to boxwoods and thinks that that's a Virginia landscape, but of course they're just green all the time. There's not a whole lot of seasonal interest to them. And so with greater diversity, you get a lot of seasonal interest. Stormwater runoff, I mentioned with the first slide. To me, every landscape should pay attention to the fact that water falls from the sky and is going to go through your landscape in one way or another, whether that's coming out of a downspout or coming out of a storm drain or just coming down a hill or coming across the lawn. You know, think about the fact that you can do some things on your land to improve the quality of water that leaves your property. And what you should try and do is manage most of your water on your land. So, and of course, wildlife habitat's also important. As I was saying before, you know, builders come in, they remove the native forest, they replace it with non-native plants. And so wherever we can kind of build islands of habitat, I think that's really important and helps them out. So we'll start in Ashburn Village. This is a project we did 5 or 6 years ago. They came to me wanting to redo pollinator habitat around their lakes in their village. And so this is the first one we did. This is Tippecanoe Lake. And as you can see, we concentrated on doing some really diverse plantings, but we did things in sweeps so that the maintenance companies could take care of it easier. We ended up doing the maintenance for a little while, and it was a great thing. But we then handed it over to another firm. Didn't have they didn't have the proper abilities to do it, and so we're working at getting it back into shape at the moment. But we did win some awards with it, and so I think it's the first time a native plant landscape has won an award in the area. Signatures Loudoun is a pretty cool little program out here, and so we were really pleased and happy. And of course, people of Ashburn Village thought that was a really great thing, and you know, it's a trophy you can hang on your wall, I guess. But in talking about getting everybody on board, this was the second lake that we did. This is Ashburn Lake, and as soon as we started, you know, I never interacted with the homeowners during the development of any of these plans, and that was a mistake, you know, and not my mistake, but you know, the general manager of the HOA probably should have gotten some committees together and talked about these things. But basically, I just worked up these plans. We started getting them out into the garden, and when we started to do this and got to the stage where we were removing grass, one of the homeowners came out and said, you know, what are you doing? And I told her that we were putting in these pollinator gardens. And she's like, well, where are my kids going to play? And she was thinking about the lawn behind her house. Well, there's probably 20 acres of lawn still left around this. And so there's plenty of places where kids can pick up and play soccer. But I didn't want to approach it that way. I wanted to approach it in a positive light, that we were giving her a different type of entertainment for her kids in the backyard. And that is that they basically had a science class that we were developing in their backyard, where they could interact with nature and see the things that nature does back and forth. And, you know, I talked to her a little bit about childhood obesity and the fact that kids who get outdoors, you know, don't have as many physical or mental problems in school. They're usually a little more focused people. And so it's a good thing for everybody. But, you know, it's like we were saying, it's something that it's different. And so people just want to know what you're doing and why you're doing it. You can see in these plantings, you know, this is the following year, huge diversity in the plantings. And I actually, at Ashburn Lake, I actually got a little crazier as a designer than at Tippecanoe. I wanted it to be more unique and more, you know, showy. And of course, that makes it more difficult to maintain. And so Ashburn Village, you know, said, hey, you know, this is really beautiful and everything, but we need the next one a little less diverse, a little easier to maintain. I like the great diversity that's here. There's a lot of interest. There's not only flower interest, there's texture and foliage back and forth. Oops, went the wrong way there. But that brought us to Beach Lake, which they asked me to do a simpler design for. They said, we've got this grassy knoll. We want to cover it with pollinator garden, but it needs to be maintained by our regular crews. So can you just, originally they just said, can you just put a bunch of purple cone flowers up there? Well, I didn't go quite that monotypic, but we did do a patch of purple coneflower, a patch of anti-sissup, a patch of mountain mint, and a patch of Joe pieweed. And then it was handed over to their crews, which are basically mow and blow crews. They were the same guys who was mowing these lawns. And unfortunately, they didn't know some of the plants that were in these plantings. And, you know, we had ornamental grasses all around the purple coneflower. Was prairie drop seed. They weed whacked all of that. And the neighbors started to complain because the neighbors were never consulted on this. To the left of this picture, there's two guys who are golfers, and they used to love looking out over this grassy knoll. And, you know, we showed up one day and started tearing out the grass and putting in plants. And, you know, immediately they were kind of like, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? And, you know, while quite a few homeowners were very complimentary of all this, the two guys who lived right next to it were disappointed that nobody had talked to them about it. So when you're developing these things, make sure you've got your neighborhood on board before you go tearing things apart and installing them. But you can see some places, you know, this is a big patch of crabgrass growing in the middle of this, you know, because the guys that were maintaining it at the time, this was in its first year, just didn't even go inside and touch anything in here because they just didn't know what they were doing. So we've got the maintenance back at this point. But, you know, it's a higher price point for us because we're a little more specialized. That's a little tougher on the HOA. And that's, again, where maybe some planning ahead and, you know, having that worked out ahead of time is probably the way to go. But I have Pokemon up here because the first time I came out to this knoll to work on the design, there were a bunch of kids down here underneath the willow tree, and they were playing Pokemon. I didn't have any idea what they were doing there, but they were playing Pokemon, and so we left a patio down there for them to be able to play. And I think that's really important that gardens have access. And you know, this kind of sits off of a jogging trail, so it's a little bit you know, out of the way for people to come up into the grass. But almost every time I'm there, I'll find a family up in here taking pictures with their kids and whatnot. There've been, wedding pictures taken at these gardens and whatnot. And so that's great things for community involvement, I think. So as far as managing expectations goes, again, this is Glencore's cluster in Reston, Virginia, and they had a pretty good plan when they got started. They interviewed, I don't know, maybe 10 different companies. They put out an RFP for a design. I competed with these other guys, and we went through a process of elimination, and finally I was awarded the contract for the design and implementation. And so, this is a small part of the project that you're seeing here in front of me. And, but, the project in total was about $100,000. And so when you spend something like that, you expect to kind of see an instant landscape. And, these days we pretty much use plugs of plants to get gardens like this started. We're finding a lot more success in getting things established than using bigger plants. But you just got to prepare people that this is what they're going to see. They're going to see kind of a sparse landscape at first, but these things grow and they fill in over time, and they do wonderful as life goes on. But you just have to prepare people for a lot of things that are different about native plant projects or pollinator projects, whatever you want to call them, stormwater runoff. They're much more diverse. And they support a lot of life. And so that's something you need to tell them is of course, this is that same garden a year later. And so you see things have filled in, and they fill in pretty quickly, which is a great thing. But, you've got, I was talking about seasonal interest before. This is early summer with the Queen of the Prairie here. We've got some Rudbeckia maxima. That's early summer, and we've got mountain mint down here in the front, which is it blooms all summer long. This isn't really its bloom. It's kind of like a poinsettia. It has a modified leaf called a bract that turns white in the summertime, and so that'll stay that color all summer long. But this is a plant that gets really, really covered in pollinators, and so there's a sidewalk right here, and so people are very close to these plants. And I'll bet you when this picture was taken, there's thousands of bees in this picture. You can't really see them because they're too small, but I'll guarantee you there's literally thousands of bees covering this mountain mint. So, some people are afraid of bees. Some people are scared to death of bees. These are honeybees and, our native pollinators. So they're not interested in us at all. And so don't go in there and start waving your hands around and getting them all stirred up, and you'll be fine. They won't pay any attention to them. But these are things you're going to have to tell the public because, I've seen places where someone will call and have the bees on flowers like this sprayed because they think the bees are harmful. So it goes contradictory to what we're trying to do to kill off the bees. So, and I know you guys don't want to do that. That's why you're here, but just be prepared that there's a lot of interactions with wildlife that you're going to have that you need to prepare people for. And speaking of which, this is one of them. Basically down at your feet of that mountain mint, maybe there's a black snake sitting there waiting to catch its morning meal. This was at my house in Herndon, and my wife and I had a meadow out in the front yard, and we were out there Sunday morning drinking our coffee, and we were admiring this little baby bunny that was kind of sitting right here when all of a sudden, boom, out of nowhere came that black snake and took him out. So those things happen. And again, the only dangerous snake that we have in Northern Virginia really is the copperhead, and they don't really bother people. They stay in the woods. But again, you got to caution people if these things are going to happen. You're going to have these interactions. So now you got a native plant garden. What are you going to do? Well, you need to maintain it. And so how do you do that? And I'll just start off by saying we did one of these symposiums a couple of months ago, and one of the questions was, how do you teach your landscaping company to work with native plants? And I always think that's funny. you shouldn't teach your landscaping company how to do their job. If you have to teach them how to do their job, you should look for another landscaping company. You wouldn't tell your electrician how to do his job. You wouldn't tell your plumber how to do their job. And so, what are some things you can do to test people as to whether they know something or not? There's no certifications or qualifications from the county that are required to show up in an HOA and say, yeah, I'm the native plant expert, I'm here. But ask them things about the plants. Can they name the plants? Can you tell me what this plant is in this picture? I can tell you what every one of these plants is in this picture, but I've been doing this for 30 years, and maybe there's somebody who doesn't know the names, and if they don't know the names, they probably don't know how to take care of them. So that's a big thing right there. Do they know plant and animal associations, like the monarch butterfly and milkweed is a famous one? If they've never heard of that, you're probably talking to the wrong person. Common and Latin names, this is Solidago rugosa, this is Phlox paniculata, this is Rudbeckia fulgida. I'm just showing off, but this is how you can test people as to whether they know what they're doing. Do they have some references? Did you get their name from somebody? Have they won awards for their work? What's their plan? Again, you shouldn't be telling your landscaper how to take care of your landscape. They should tell you. You're hiring them to be the experts in this, and so let them do that. Are you going to do deadheading? Are you going to prune things into a box? In pollinator gardens, you don't want to cut flowers back because they produce seed, and the seed then feeds our songbirds. But in some cases, maybe you've got flowers that are hanging over pathways and blocking pathways, and they become a nuisance. And so you want to trim those things back. You don't want to prune things into a box. One of the beauties of this garden is, you've got different levels, different layers that you're working with, different foliage, different textures. That all adds to it. You can see there's not really anything in bloom in this picture, but it's still a lovely garden to look at. And again, what's a weed? I think it's important to have a point person that is kind of your care person, and they don't always have to be on the job site. Like in our case, what we do is the guys are trained that, in this case, this is not us that maintains this project, but these guys have done it since the beginning. And so this is 4 years down the road, and it's the same crew that comes ever since the beginning. And so they know the plants at this point. They know the plant, they know what's a weed, they know what's not a weed. In our case, what we have the guys trained to do is, if they're not sure, because that does happen, take a picture, email it to us. We'll give you a yay or nay, and then you can deal with the weeds that way. That cuts down. If they can't get a hold of me, they're all trained that if you don't know what it is, don't touch it, and we'll deal with it next time. Take a picture, and we'll figure out what it is. I love dogs. Not a lot of people love dogs more than me, but they all need a place to pee. It is their nature to mark their territory, and so give them something to do that rather than your plants. Maybe put a boulder here, or go on to a website and order a fire hydrant that you can put out there for them to pee on, and it really will save you a lot of money. You'd be surprised, because this is Glencourse, and we didn't do that to begin with, and everybody would walk their dogs would come along and pee on the plants, and so we lost kind of the first 2 feet of the garden in the first year. So plan ahead for that. And again, seasonal interest. For you folks in Fairfax County, Glencourse is really easy to get to and see. It's right off of Soapstone Road, and you can literally just drive back through there and see these gardens. They're all within sight of the road. But again, we live in a temperate climate. We're not a tropical climate, and I'm married to a woman from Ecuador, and she used to always tease me in the wintertime that everything was dead. And I was like, no, it's just sleeping. This is another one of our seasons. And, you know, it's part of the package. And, you know, I love it. I love the change of the seasons. And I think if you grew up in the North, you probably do too. I love seeing that first snow every year. So do some things that, you know, complement those seasons. You know, we always talk about spring and spring wildflowers, but fall really is our most beautiful time for everything. You know, and if you mix the right plants together, you can really put on a nice fall show. And even winter. And speaking of winter interest, you know, when I see this picture, I see this little flower head, and I think of the Dr. Seuss book, Horton Hears a Who. And, you know, basically this is Whoville. And, you know, if you were to tear this apart and look at it under a microscope, you'd see a very complicated civilization of little tiny insects and protozoa and microbes and fungi and bacteria and whatnot that live in here over the wintertime. And all those little things are a part of the food chain and protein for songbirds in the wintertime. And there also can be beautiful things. I think, you know, we were brainwashed for a long time to cut everything back in the fall because you don't have to look at this. Well, if you don't have this to look at, what are you looking at? And to me, these are beautiful scenes of deciduous foliage. You know, this is one of our native hollies, Winterberry Holly against switchgrass. Really, really pretty winter combination. This is New York Ironweed with switchgrass as well. And again, you know, those are flowers. You know, they're seeds at this point. They're not flowers anymore, but they still, you know, look like the flower was there and give you some winter interest. And they're very, very important for our songbirds in the wintertime and for migratory birds coming through. You know, you'll see Winterberry out there through the winter, and then all of a sudden, one day you'll come out and a big flock of something will come through and just annihilate them all, and they're gone. So, but it's very pretty to look at through the wintertime. So as I was saying, you know, water is very important. There's a couple of different ways you can deal with it: rain gardens, bioretention swales, repairing buffers. I'm not going to go into this much today, but I did want to show you a couple things that we've done. This is basically what we call conservation landscaping. You know, this property is on a hillside and has a lot of water that comes down through this area. This is our native Pachysandra growing here. One of our native jack-in-the-pulpits growing with foam flower underneath it in the back here. We've got a witch hazel. We've got some bloodroot and some ginger over here. And this is looking at it from the top down. The water all kind of goes through here and across this patio and down the street to 4 Mile Run. This is down in Alexandria. And, you know, it basically has to go through all that stuff before it gets to this drain. And we have several drains throughout the property. But, you know, basically all that water's coming across here. And I should mention that this used to all be English ivy. And when it was English ivy, they had huge erosion problems because ivy really doesn't hold soil the way our native plants do. And, you know, for some reason back in the 50s, they thought it'd be a good idea to rip out our native plants and start planting English ivy. But it was really, again, kind of like planting kudzu. It was a really, really bad idea. So now we've gotten this back to where basically the water is clean before it even gets down to these drains. And each of these drains then leads out into a bit of a rain garden and before it gets down to the street and 4 Mile Run. So, you know, once the water's leaving this property, it's already been cleaned quite a bit. And better than being cleaned, it hasn't been polluted. It hasn't been treated with herbicides. It hasn't been treated with pesticides. It hasn't been treated with fertilizers or anything. It's just native plants growing in native soil. And so this is a rain garden that we designed and built out in Boyce, Virginia at a private school. And basically this is their science class. You know, what are the things you get from rain gardens? You get biofiltration. In this case, all the water from the roofs of the school come off and down into piping and directly into this rain garden. So you get all these plants filtering that water with their roots. You get energy transfer because you're capturing light, you're putting it into plants. You get ecological services because of all the pollinators and wildlife that uses this as habitat, and you get biodiversity. And biodiversity is important because, let's say this white plant here is called Culver's root. Let's say this was all Culver's root in here instead of all these different species. Well, if a bug came in, let's call it COVID-19, and infected one of these Culver's root, well, there's no social distancing going on. And so all the culvert root catches the COVID-19 and dies. Not a good thing. But because we have diversity in here, well, now maybe the COVID-19 comes in and affects the Culver's root, but it only affects the Culver's root. It doesn't affect the blue flag iris or the Joe Pye weed. So while you may lose this population of this plant, you still maintain a diverse planting of other plants, and you stop the spread of the disease. It doesn't go to the next planting of Culver's root. So biodiversity is incredibly important. In this case, not only does this rain garden filter the school's water, but when it leaves this rain garden, it goes down through a meadow that the children planted alongside the Shenandoah River. So by the time this water reaches the Shenandoah, it's been as cleaned as it probably can be cleaned naturally. And the kids learn this. The kids are seeing this happen and participating in it. So it's a wonderful education tool. And again, biodiversity doesn't mean you have to have a big space. This is Ellen Lambeth's house in Fairfax, and she's the editor of Ranger Rick magazine. If you are fans of Ranger Ricks, I know I am. I always have been. But we helped her develop this little garden in her front yard, and it's just, to me, the perfect example of, here's your typical Northern Virginia townhome. One plant here, one non-native tree here, and a bunch of non-native turf grass. Well, look at all the different species we were able to cram into Ellen's little space here. And not everything's a native. There's some zinnias over here, but, she liked them, and they feed butterflies and whatnot. There's a Nandina right here that I tried to get her to get rid of because they're a non-native invasive species, and their berries are known to kill birds. And so Ellen already knew this, of course, and she said, look, I like the plant. It has great foliage to it. I'll trim off the berries in the fall so that the birds don't get them. And so I said, fine. And not that she needed my approval or anything, but I think it's important to be a responsible gardener. So if you are going to garden with non-native plants, like if you're going to put miscanthus grass out there for some reason, trim back those seeds and dispose of them properly. One of the reasons miscanthus grass is so invasive is that, landscapers come in and they trim it all back, and then they put it on the back of their truck and they drive off down the road, and it's like Johnny Appleseed spreading the seeds of the miscanthus grass all over Northern Virginia. And if you go right outside of Tyson's Corner on the Beltway, you'll see almost a monoculture of miscanthus grass there. And get up around Philly, you see the same thing. So we want diversity, we want native, we want beauty. It's the homeowners that are paying for this, so it has to be a beautiful thing that they look at and are happy that they spent the money on. And then you have to properly care for things over time. We're seeing a lot of change at the moment. Like I said, back when I started, landscaping was kind of about 3 yews and an arborvitae on the corner of the house. It's becoming much different at this point and much more diverse in our plant selection, which is a really great thing. And again, it's native, so it's meant to grow there. That natives really should be the first choice for any landscaping committee. But I think sometimes we just, people know crepe myrtles or they know magnolias and they go, well, we want some crepe myrtles. Well, there's no ecological benefit to a crepe myrtle. So maybe think of something else like a Carolina silver bell or something that feeds our pollinators. And we've gotten into a time of where, you know, when I went to school, I'm an Ohio State grad, and I took ornamental horticulture, and that's what it was. It was ornamental. It was to be looked at and enjoyed by the human eye, and that's it. There was never any talk about ecology or where plants came from or those types of things. And so I'm glad that we're having symposiums like today's, and I'm glad that you guys are all here to learn about a more diverse set of landscaping. I'll leave you with this picture because to me, it's another example of the fact that there's a plant in this picture that is dead, and it still is a complement to the landscape. I was at this residence a few days before this picture was taken, and I said to him, "Hey, if you don't water that goldenrod over there, it's going to die." And this was, you know, this was pretty fresh planting. It was new planting, and we were in a drought, and so they needed to do some supplemental watering. They didn't. I came back a few days later, and the plant had died. But it was still a beautiful part of the landscape. And so just consider these things. And don't forget the fact that just because this plant is dead doesn't mean it's not serving ecological functions anymore. It's feeding some insects, it's feeding some fungi, it's still doing its thing. It's sequestering carbon. You know, the plant has taken carbon out of the air, photosynthesized, sequestered that into its structure, and of course will now rot away into this and become part of the soil. So very important part of gardening. So I will leave you guys with that. If anybody has any questions, just let me know.
Thanks so much, John.